actually one of those weird people who enjoys the morning. Like, there's something about the way it's so unsurprising. Like, the moment I leave the house, I have no idea what's going to happen, but every morning has this simplicity, this routine, this consistency about it. I speak pretty regularly at this one college. It's the same college every year, and I noticed something. There was this girl on the worship team, and every time I came there, it seemed like she was different. Not like in a fake different, but it seemed like even though she was just one of the singers on the worship team, she would get more passionate, it seemed, every week. And I was surprised by that because, you know, I speak and I go to different places, and it can get routine-ish. And so I finally approached her one day. I go, you know, even though you do this every week, it seems like it's really fresh to you every single week, and it's new to you every week. And I just asked, how do you do that? And she said something really interesting. She goes, when I have like a great time with the Lord and worship, I never say, God, give me what I experienced last week. Duplicate what you do it again, what you did last week. She goes, instead, I say to him, God, you are a creator, and would you create something new in my worship experience with you? Would you give me a whole new perspective of you this time when I worship? And I thought, wow, that is so cool. I never thought of that aspect of God being a creator and wanting to create something new. And I thought, why don't I do that even when I pray, even when I have times alone with the Lord? Why don't I just pray and say, God, this time when I pray to you, this time when I spend time alone with you, I want us to be more intimate than ever before. Would you create a whole new experience with you? Would you expand my understanding of you? And it's pretty interesting. If we were to really do that and focus and put that type of effort into it, I just think, what would our relationships with God be like at the end of our lives? When I was growing up, I remember every night we'd sit around the dinner table, and my dad would make us pray every night before we ate. The crazy thing about it was we would pray the exact same prayer every night, like word for word, no variation. Either I would pray it, or my brother would pray it, or one of my sisters would pray it, but we would say word for word. And I know that means nothing to you, but every night, word for word. And so it became this pattern, and it got to a point where I would pray it before breakfast, before lunch. Every time before I ate, I would have to pray that magical Chinese prayer of God bless this food, because I didn't want him to poison it. And I look back at that and I think, wow, that's so ridiculous. Without exaggerating, I bet you I prayed that prayer at least 5,000 times over my lifetime, word for word. In fact, I remember one time, and this was the stupidest thing. I remember being in junior high, and I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I believed in God. I was embarrassed to pray, but I knew we're at lunch, and we were at this amusement park. It was a field trip. I still remember it. We were at this place called Great America, and a bunch of my friends were at this table. We got our food and our drinks, and I'm thinking, I gotta pray before I eat, but I don't want anyone to see me. And so I still remember dropping my fork on purpose just so that I could bend over and pick it up. And on my way down, I'd be like, and no one would notice, and then I could eat my food. It's like, oh, good, it's blessed now. And you probably haven't done anything that stupid, but I think we all get into some sort of routine in our prayers to where it can become meaningless. Whether it's before meals, or maybe you have a morning devotional time, and you almost just sink into this prayer mode without thinking about what you're doing. And I think it hit me when I was in high school. One time I was at this kind of Christian retreat, and early in the morning I got up to pray and have my devotional time with God. And I remember sitting down, started to pray, started to read, and then I looked across the field and I saw the camp speaker, the guy that was giving all the messages that week. And he was across the field, and he was praying and reading. And for some reason in my mind, I started thinking, I bet you he prays differently than I do. Because, you know, as a kid, you look up to these guys that are at the pulpit and you think, wow, he's the speaker, he's the pastor, he must have such an amazing relationship with God. So I thought to myself, I bet you he prays differently. I bet you he is so close to God when he prays. I bet you he really thinks that he's in the presence of God. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to pray like that this time. And I actually pictured myself speaking to someone, speaking to God. And it's weird, but I realized up until that point, I don't think I ever considered the fact that I was speaking to a person when I was praying. It became this routine or ritual to me. And so it began this pattern in my life where I thought, you know what, I want to think about him every time I pray. I want to think about who I'm speaking to because it makes such a difference. And what was crazy was the more I studied the scriptures, the more I read the Bible and I would read these descriptions of God, the more it would change my prayer life because I would picture God differently. I would see him differently. It's like I remember when I first studied Revelation chapter 4 and I read John's description of God, of what it was like when he was in heaven. And he talks about how he saw this being sitting on this throne, but he said he's not like a normal flesh and blood person. He's like diamonds and rubies, and he's glowing, and there's lightning, and there's fire, and there's thunder, and there's 100 million angels, and so it was such a massive picture of God that after reading that passage, I remember closing my eyes and thinking, okay, I'm about to approach him. I'm about to come before him and speak to him. And so I closed my eyes and I'd picture this being who's sitting on the throne and he's glowing with diamonds and rubies and he's this unapproachable light and there's lightning, thunder, fire, and angels all around. And then I pictured myself coming before that being and speaking to him. And it was like I didn't even know what to say, and these words came out of my mouth. Like, it's such an honor to come into your presence. And I just, ever since that day that I read that passage and prayed, I thought to myself, I would never have said those words if I didn't take that 30 seconds to think about him. And I want you to consider, what would be the first words, literally, the first words out of your mouth the moment you saw God in all of his glory? What would come out of your mouth? See, and that's what should come out of our mouths when we pray. Because what we're doing is we're coming before that God and speaking to him. In your discussion group, talk about what you think would come out of your mouth the moment you saw God. Like, what would be the first words you would say if you literally saw him? And also, after reading chapter 1, hopefully your relationship with God was different this week, that your prayer life was different this week. Talk about that. Talk about how it was different, or maybe if your relationship with God wasn't different enough, then talk about how you'd love to see it change.